cracked my door open and pressed my face against the gap. Dad was pacing the living room with his phone against his ear and a locked briefcase gripped in his other hand. Mom was standing in the kitchen doorway with tears running down her face. I said, "They are not getting anywhere near my family." Dad spun toward the counter and swept a glass off the edge, and it shattered against the wall, and Mom stumbled backward. My hands tightened on the doorframe. Then Dad saw me through the crack. The fury drained from his face in one beat. His shoulders dropped, his jaw unclenched. He crossed the room and crouched in front of me and put his hands on my shoulders, and the glass was still on the kitchen floor behind him. "Hey buddy, go pack a bag. We're going on a trip." His voice was warm and steady, and it terrified me more than the shouting because the man who'd just thrown a glass was smiling at me like nothing had happened. Fresh start. Dad said it 3 times during the drive, and each time he gripped the steering wheel tighter. My sister Bea was asleep in the back seat with her stuffed rabbit pressed against her cheek. Mom was staring out the passenger window, chewing the inside of her lip. Nobody had spoken for the last hour, except Dad. His words said vacation, but his knuckles said something else. "This is going to be great." The 4 of us with no distractions. His knuckles were white on the wheel. The dirt road twisted so deep into the woods the GPS had died 20 minutes ago. Trees pressed against both sides of the road so tight the headlights barely cut through. Dad pulled up to the cabin and killed the engine, and the silence was instant and enormous. Bea woke up and pressed her face against the window. "Is this it? Can we go swimming?" "Tomorrow, baby." Dad carried the bags in with one hand. The other gripped a locked briefcase that he hadn't let go of since we left the house. He shoved it under his bed before touching anything else. When he opened the trunk, I caught the smell of gasoline on his hands. "Why do you smell like gas?" "Filled up on the way. Pump was broken." I carried Bea and her rabbit inside. The cabin was small and clean and smelled like pine. For a second, I almost believed the vacation story. Dad unpacked groceries while Mom made the beds, and Bea ran from room to room, opening every drawer. I wandered out back and found the lake. The water was still and black. I crouched at the edge, and the trees reflected back like a mirror. Dad came up behind me and put his hand on my shoulder. "I used to fish here when I was your age." He pulled a folding knife from his pocket and crouched by the shore. He picked up a stick and started whittling. "My dad taught me to gut a fish with a knife just like this one. Want me to show you tomorrow?" "Yeah." He handed me the knife. "Keep it. Every man should have a good knife." He showed me how to hold it and clean the blade on your jeans and fold it one-handed. The whole time he was smiling, the real smile, the one that reached his eyes. I folded the knife and put it in my pocket. The weight of it pressed against my thigh. His hand was still on my shoulder, and I leaned into it, and the desperate hope that everything wrong at home was going to be fine here made my chest ache. Then we went inside, and Dad locked the front door with a padlock. Not the deadbolt, but a padlock from the inside. The click rang through the whole cabin, and I flinched. Mom saw the padlock, and her whole body went rigid. "Just for safety," Dad said. "We're in the middle of nowhere, and if anyone comes up that road, you come tell me first." "Why would anyone come up here? They won't. But if they do," he held out his hand. "Phones." "What?" "No distractions this week. That's the whole point of a fresh start." Mom handed hers over without looking at him. I held mine for a beat too long, and Dad's eyes locked onto me, and something behind them flickered. "Jesse." I handed it over. He put all 3 phones in a lockbox and slid it under the bed in his room. Bea tugged his sleeve hard. "Daddy, can I call Grandma?" "Not this week, baby." "Why?" "Because this week is just for us." His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, and his face changed when he saw the screen. He silenced it and shoved it back. "Who was that?" "Nobody." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The dread crept up my spine, and my hands went cold for the first time. We ate dinner without talking. The wind scraped branches against the boarded windows. Dad made pasta that night. Bea talked about the lake and the trees and her rabbit. Dad smiled at her and responded to everything she said. He set his fork down with a click. Some ground rules for the trip. Mom's hand froze over her plate. No going outside after dark. No exceptions. He looked at each of us. No leaving the table during meals. He looked at me specifically. No talking after 8 p.m. "That's insane," I said. "It's peaceful. That's the difference. We can't talk after 8? You can talk, just not loudly." Mom put her hand on my arm under the table and squeezed. The squeeze said, "Shut up." That squeeze said everything her face didn't. After dinner, I cornered her in the hallway. "What's going on?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Your father's been under a lot of stress at work." "This isn't stress." He padlocked the door. "Just do what he says." She grabbed both my hands, and her grip was shaking. "Please, Jesse. It'll be over soon." "What'll be over? What's he afraid of?" "People." "What people?" "The kind that don't knock." She walked away. Bea was in the bunk room arranging her rabbit on the pillow. "Jesse, this cabin is so cool. Can we go fishing tomorrow?" "Yeah, Bea, we can go fishing." I dropped onto the edge of her bed and she climbed into my lap. The knife in my pocket pressed against my thigh. The padlock on the front door pressed against my mind. My 7-year-old sister was asking asking about fishing, while the fear crushed my ribs. Hammering jolted me awake. Dad was in the living room with a box of nails and a hammer, and he was nailing a board across the front window. "What are you doing?" "Keeping us safe." "From what?" He drove the next nail so hard the wall cracked. "There are animals out here. Bears. I don't want Bea near the glass." I gripped the door frame because there hadn't been bears in this part of the state for 30 years. He nailed the second window, then the third. Bea trailed him from room to room, clutching her rabbit. "Daddy, are the bears really scary?" "Very scary, baby. Scarier than the dark. Much scarier." She held her rabbit tighter and pressed close to his leg. He put his hand on her head without breaking stride and kept nailing. The tenderness of that gesture made my skin crawl. The same hand hammering boards over windows was resting gently on his daughter's hair. He hung blankets over every window, and the cabin went from bright to dim to cave dark, and Bea came back to me, clutching her rabbit. "Jessie, it's dark." And he crouched in front of her and said, "I know, baby. We're playing a game. Whoever keeps the blankets up the longest wins." She believed him. New rules. No going near the doors. No looking behind the blankets. No asking about the phones. No talking about home. Every rule was delivered in the same calm voice, like he was reading a menu. Mom cooked lunch, and her hands were shaking so badly she dropped a pan, and Dad said, "Careful," in a tone that made the hair on my arms stand up. After lunch, Mom pulled Dad into their bedroom, and I pressed my ear against the door. "You have to stop this. The kids are scared. The kids are fine." "Jesse isn't fine. He's asking questions." "Then stop him from asking questions. This isn't what you said. You said a week. You said it would blow over and we'd go home. Plans change. I want to go home." A sound, sharp, skin on skin. Mom gasped, then silence. I shoved the door open. Mom was holding her cheek. Dad stood over her with his hand still raised. The horror hit me like ice water because the look on his face wasn't anger. He looked annoyed, like she'd interrupted a meeting. "Go back to your room, Jesse. You hit her." I said go back to your room. Mom shook her head at me, tears streaming, mouthing, "Go." I went. I dropped onto my bunk, shaking. I pulled the fishing knife from my pocket and opened it. The blade caught the light, not to use it, to remind myself I had something. Bea was coloring on the floor. "Jesse, is Daddy mad?" "No. He sounds mad. He's just tired. Can we go fishing?" "Maybe later." I waited until midnight. Dad was asleep in the chair by the front door with the hammer across his lap. I crept to the back bedroom and woke Mom and Bea. "We're leaving." Mom shook her head. "He'll hear us." The window in Bea's room. It's the only one he didn't nail from the outside. I carried Bea to the window. She held her rabbit against her chest. I slid the window up inch by inch. Night air rushed in cold and clean. I lifted Bea onto the sill. "Climb down. I'm right behind you." The floor creaked behind me. Dad was standing in the doorway. "Put her down." Bea started crying. "Daddy, put her down, Jesse. Now." His voice was calm. I lowered Bea back inside. Dad walked to the window and closed it. He pulled a handful